I tell you what you don't want, and that's for your clients to find out from the newspaper.
It's that old saying, you don't want to be the weakest link.
But when quantum encryption hits the market, it can crack those passwords straight away.
And what's to say that the password manager itself won't get hacked?
Trust and reputation takes years and years to grow. And unfortunately, with a cyber breach, it's just gone in seconds.
Today's episode is sponsored by VXT, the phone system built for law firms. VXT integrates with practice management systems so that when lawyers make calls, their billable time and legal advice can be saved in the right place automatically. 20% of billable time goes unrecorded. A lot of that is phone calls that get forgotten about. Get some of those billables back using VXT. Go to vxt.co.nz or click the link in the description to find out more.
Annie, it's great to have you on the podcast. Cybersecurity is such a hot topic at the moment for law firms. And about 18 months ago, you started your own firm, CyberGC, and your work sits at quite a unique intersection of law, technology, and cybersecurity. So can you tell us what your background is that led you to this specialized role?
Thanks for having me on, Sophie. It's great to join you today. I accidentally fell into technology and cybersecurity law, and I hate saying that because people who desperately want to get into this space these days, I speak to a lot of law students, how to become a cyber lawyer, and I go, well, sometimes it's just that you take the opportunities ahead of you. But when I was back at law school, I started working for a small startup firm that was focused on technology law, particularly working with the Commonwealth Government at the time on big outsourcing contracts. So I started to get a taste even when I was at law school. But how did I get that job? That was a bit of an accident. It was friends of friends, and they were literally just starting up a tiny little firm, and it was fantastic because it was real hands-on experience. So I went from there after a few years of paralegaling. I went to DLA Piper. It was DLA Phillips Fox back then, and joined their Melbourne team and was working in the technology, media and telecommunications practice. So working with some of the partners there on a really large range of deals, some for government clients as well, but also working with software developers and working with technology projects that required technology as a part of the thing that made it go. So that included registration and licensing systems, and it included traffic light systems, because technology really has become part of everything that we do. It used to be a very specialized area, but there's not really an area of the law or an area of business that doesn't have a technology element. And that's been a really interesting place to work from a legal perspective, because what had been niche 20 years ago is now embedded everywhere you look. And that brings with it its own issues, including issues around security. And so whilst I didn't immediately get into the security space, it was after a number of years at DLA, I moved into house to Accenture, and I joined their in-house legal team negotiating their contracts with clients. And all of those were technology contracts. Accenture, for those who don't know, is one of the world's largest IT and consulting companies. They have over 700,000 employees, which you have to pause and think, gosh, that sounds like a lot of people. 7 MCGs entirely full. That's how many employees around the world there are in that company. It's an enormous company. And they do a really wide range of services and products for their clients. So that was really fascinating, because we got to be working as lawyers at the very forefront of the new technology. And I helped the deal teams and the clients in that role to work on some of the very early cloud arrangements, where we were taking technology, instead of having it on computers that sat under our desks or on our desks or in our offices, and moving it to the cloud, which everyone was very suspicious of. And then other technologies called things like blockchain and very early AI and robotics. And that was all around, how are we making things more secure, but enabling technology to do things for us faster, more reliably, and free us up to do other work. And out of that sort of naturally grew an interest in security. And so when the Accenture team said, oh, we're going to actually start a whole business around security services, we need some people with legal skills to help us start that up, startup inside an enormous 700,000 people company. It's a bit of an odd concept, but it was run a bit like a startup. And we had to understand what these security things were and what the legal issues were around that. And I knew nothing really about security. I had a good grasp of technology by that stage, but the security space was new. But if you think back over some of the different elements that you tackle as a technology lawyer, cloud has a big security element. Cloud's very exciting. You can use computers that aren't where you are, but how do you do that securely so that other people aren't accessing your information? Blockchain is a principle of computing and records keeping and using technology that actually comes back to security. And how we're using AI and how we're using bots and other things, it all comes back to how we're securing the use of that technology. So I have, well, fallen into this path over as the 20-year technology law career. It's also naturally evolves as the technology has had a need to become more secure. The legal advice around that has to also adapt to looking at security issues. So I spent 6 years as global legal counsel for Accenture Security. And over that time, we looked at all sorts of cool issues like, is it legal to pay a ransom if somebody's ransoming your client and their systems are locked up and maybe they're a hospital and people are on life support machines that are inoperable because they've been encrypted by a threat actor? Can you pay a ransom? Is it legal to do that? Well, it depends on where you are in the world. And in some places, yes, it is. And in some places, no, it's not. So that was one of the first questions is, well, where are you? But there's also the client was actually saying, oh, could you pay it? Because there's a technical issue with paying a ransom. Most threat actors don't want you to pay into their bank account because that would involve them providing an identity and the money could be tracked, right? So they're criminals. They have to take the money from you in a way that can't be traced. So they will use cryptocurrency, which is based on blockchain technology. But cryptocurrency is not something everybody has lying around. And so to pay a ransom, the clients weren't actually able to do that if they wanted to and if it was legal. So they asked whether we could do it. Now, that was an entirely different set of questions about, is it legal to pay a ransom on someone else's behalf? Did we have a cryptocurrency wallet we could use? Was that a risk we were prepared to take as a business? So this was all these kinds of crazy questions that we were tackling as a business and as a legal team for that business, getting on for 10 years ago now. And some of these questions, can we pay a ransom, are sadly ones that legal teams are having to advise on all the time now in the security space, because people's systems are being ransomed, people are being attacked on a daily basis by cyber threat actors. And it, over the last 10 years, gone from being a little bit of a niche area to being in the newspapers every day. And that was one of the reasons why I started my firm 18 months ago, was because I realized that the experience and knowledge I had over the last 10 years was going to be really valuable and important to bring to the Australian community so that we could start to get very small businesses all the way through to very large businesses across the issues from a legal perspective, but also thinking with security as part of their core risk management and as part of how they do business. We talk about security by design rather than thinking about security as a band-aid solution. We want people to be thinking about security from the ground up all the time, because that's one of the only ways we're going to be secure as a community, is if that mindset shifts. So it's been a long, very interesting career over 20 years in different roles, but all the way through it's had a theme of emerging technology and just solving the problems that are facing our clients and facing the community as we want to embrace all the fun and benefits that our technology brings with us, but balanced with some of the risks and problematic areas like security breaches that come along with it.
Can you elaborate on the type of work that you're doing for your clients?
Yeah, so there's a few different types of cyber lawyer out there. There are people, predominantly the lawyers who are working in this space, are helping clients who have had a cybersecurity breach and they need help to understand what their legal obligations are following a breach. So who do they have to tell? What do they have to tell them? Particularly where it's a personal data breach, who has to be notified, and the regulations around compliance with the Privacy Act in Australia and privacy principles. That's a really important area because breaches are happening to organizations every day. I don't do a lot of work in that space because we have a very small team, but also It's because I like to work on the front end of cybersecurity, on the preventative work. So how do we set up organizations, clients, so that they are less likely to have a breach? And if they do have a breach, that they are well prepared for it. They have the policies and procedures in place to know what to do when the breach hits, so it's not total chaos. They have prepared communications and they've worked with their crisis communications advisors and their legal advisors on who they need to tell, and they know who they have to report to. We also do a lot of work in third-party supply chain risk for cybersecurity, because unfortunately, the major risk to your organization is not just that someone's going to attack your business, which is likely to happen, unfortunately. We always talk about it being a when, not if scenario that you're going to be hit by a cyber attack. But if you think about the average organization and the number of different third parties that it interacts with every day just to run its business, you'll have your office provider, you'll have your internet provider, you'll have your electricity provider, then you'll have software and hardware that you use to run your computers. And then you might have a number of different other suppliers who provide your business with services, or who you subcontract to help you deliver your work to your clients. And each of those is a third party in your supply chain. And any one of them can have a cyber attack themselves, which then exposes your organization and your data and your client's data to a breach. So it's not, unfortunately, enough these days to just secure your own organization. You have to think about securing your supply chain. And we spend a lot of time working with clients on how to do that as part of the overall organization's risk management profile. And that's looking at the different types of risk in those suppliers and then helping them to put the right contracts and procurement processes and contract management and risk management in place to work with those suppliers. So a good example is if you've got somebody who's cleaning your office, you want to know that the people who they employ are trustworthy and that they know who they are, and you want to make sure that there's controls around how they're accessing your office. But they're unlikely to have access to your IT systems, so they're not going to pose a data or information security risk to you. On the other hand, if you've got a software provider that you use to, say, put all of your financial and client information in, and they're hacked, that's a big information security risk for your business. You might lose all of your financial records, or they might be published on the dark web. It's pretty sensitive information. But there's no physical or personal risk to your business with that. And so you actually need very different things in your third-party risk management processes and in your contracts and procurement method contract methodologies to handle those different types of risks. So that's where we specialize, is in that front end preventative type work to help make sure organizations are best protected and prepared. And we also do a lot of training work and advisory work for teams, legal teams, business teams, and also boards and executives on how to understand those risks and to do that preparatory work so that when a breach happens, you're prepared for it, hopefully as minimized as possible, and you can recover as fast as you can.
And on the grand scheme of things, how often are cyber attacks affecting law firms? Do you have any examples that you could share?
So it's actually really underreported at the moment because there isn't mandatory reporting of cyber attacks. But we have had some studies of law firms over the last couple of years run by different organizations, including a group called AE Cloud, who did some studies last year. And it looks like there's a vast majority of law firms, and I won't give specific statistics because they'll be out of date by now, but the vast majority of law firms will have been hit by a cyber attack either directly or indirectly through one of their suppliers. And that's because software providers that we all use are hit by cyber attacks. We've had some big examples like MoveIt, which was a software that's used to move big files. That was hit by an attack, and that caught up quite a lot of Australia's big law firms. And then we've got the unfortunate example of H.W. Ebsworth last year, one of the biggest law firms in Australia, hit by an enormous attack that had really widespread consequences for its clients, including government clients across state and federal government. And they're the big ones that we hear about in the news. But the fact is that small law firms, and particularly suburban and sole practitioners, they just don't have the resources or the understanding to protect themselves from a cybersecurity perspective. So they're more vulnerable to a breach. They may be less on the radar of the threat actors, but actually, because of automation and AI, doesn't matter how big you are. If you're connected to the internet, the bots will find you and they'll find your vulnerabilities. And so you're likely to get caught up if you haven't already. So law firms can't afford to think it's not going to happen to me. I just hope that I'm going to be lucky and I'm going to escape. They really need to be thinking about what they can do to secure their systems. And it doesn't have to be expensive. I run a very small practice. We've only got a handful of laptops that we use, and we are able to get excellent cybersecurity across our systems thanks to small providers who are able to work with small businesses like ours. But also mentioning what I said earlier about security by design, we've started our practice with security at its core, and that's how we're managing the systems and the suppliers that we bring in. So it really does need to be something that no matter what kind of law you're in, you're starting to think about this as an issue, because your business and your firm is at risk by a loss of trust that comes when you have a cyber attack. And it is a matter of when, not if, you're going to be impacted.
And so when we think about these threats, who are the type of threat actors that we should be thinking about?
So there's four main categories that we talk about for threat actors, but in some areas there are also actually subsets. So we'll go into those in a little bit of detail. The big ticket ones are espionage, and that can be espionage of governments on governments, and it can be actually companies on companies. And espionage, fancy word for spying, really. So governments who are wanting to find out what other governments are doing. So law firms who might be at risk of that kind of threat actors, targeting them are those who are doing work for governments, whether that's state or federal. Then you've got companies who are spying on each other. So highly competitive businesses want to know what the latest product is, who's doing intellectual property registration for some fancy new thing that's going to give them the edge in the market. So if they can find out that information by doing cyber espionage on the law firm who might be managing that intellectual property registration or that new merger or deal that's happening in the back rooms, that's a way of them finding out that information that could get them a competitive edge. So espionage happens at the company level, but as well as the government level. So any business doing M&A, doing big deals, property deals, intellectual property, or anything that's a sensitive business thing, particularly where it's a heightened competitive environment, is at risk from that sort of threat actor. The second big group are called hacktivists. So it used to be that if you were an activist and you were very passionate about your cause, to take action to progress or protect your cause, you might demonstrate, or you might, in some cases, go and chain yourself to trees in a forest or to bulldozers or to trucks and make a big statement and slow down the operations of that business. You don't need to do that anymore. You can simply disrupt their IT systems from the safety of your lounge room using cyber attacks. And I'm making that sound very attractive. Please don't go do that. But hacktivists are activists who are using cyber activities to disrupt the businesses and organizations and governments whose activities they don't agree with. And so that can bring into play a really large range of different types of work. If you're working for mining companies, forestry companies, etc., some of the traditional ones, or if you are defending companies who have got any kind of activity that might be publicly not very popular, then you could potentially find your firm is the subject of hacktivist activity. The third big category are the cyber criminals. So they're really just in it for the money, and the money can be obtained either directly by we were talking earlier about ransoms and paying ransoms. So by ransoming an organization's system. So how do you ransom an organization system? You inject or you get malicious code, software code, or a type of virus, and it infects the person's laptops or servers and systems, and means that they don't work. It essentially freezes them. And that can be done for just specific types of programs, or it can be done for devices, laptops, etc. But it means that business becomes inoperable. They can't communicate, they can't run machinery, they can't send information to their clients or their employees, they can't do anything until they pay the ransom. When they pay the ransom, they'll get the decryption key, which once entered into the encryption program should set everything back to normal. It's not always as simple as that, and people will frequently find that the decryption key doesn't work, or that the decryption doesn't in fact work, even if the key does in theory work, and so the systems are still encrypted. But that means they've paid the ransom, and the cyber criminals are just after the money. So there they are, they've got a ransom, excellent, off they go. Cyber criminals haven't stopped there with ransom attacks. They've realized that they don't need to encrypt a system to get a ransom payment if they can simply steal the data and then hold the data to ransom unless they get paid. So that's a newer type of ransom attack. So it's the exfiltrate. Essentially, they take the data out of the system and they hold it on their systems and they say, unless you pay us the ransom, we will publish the data and you won't have it anymore. Sometimes they have deleted the data on the client system, and sometimes they haven't, they just threaten to publish it. So that's how they're getting the ransoms paid in that case. And then there's another technique which they're using, which is more recent, what we call triple extortion, which is they've stolen the data and they're then contacting the people whose data it is and asking them for a ransom.
Right.
So you're not only trying to get a ransom from the organization where you stole it, you're trying to get a ransom from the people who might be harmed by that data being published. And so they're really just after the money, and they have no sense of compassion for the damage that might be done. And we saw that really with the Medibank breach earlier, 2 years ago, where incredibly sensitive health information was published on the dark web, including about people's medical treatments and psychological treatments and diagnoses, information that people can't change, like their driver's license or their phone number. It's out there forever, and that can have a very long-lasting impact on people. So these cyber criminals are really awful human beings, but they're also, unfortunately, organizations who are running this as a business. They have helplines and customer service and 24/7 access to solve your cyber needs if you've been ransomed, of course. So you can have cybercrime as a service. And so you don't need to have any technical skills in order to do cybercrime anymore. You can simply pay a cyber criminal to do it for you, or you can pay them to download the tools that are needed for you to do it yourself. And that has
Crazy.
caused an explosion. It is crazy. It's caused an explosion in who these threat actors are. So that means that for law firms, it's not just that you might be targeted because somebody wants to steal your data and ransom your systems, but it might be that there is somebody who would otherwise not be a cyber criminal. They don't do this for a living, but they've got a particular interest in one of the cases you were running, and they want information about that, and they are using the services of a cyber criminal to attack your firm in a very targeted way. And this is the case for people who might be running sensitive litigation, and particularly for people who are running things like family law or other disputes that can become very emotional, where people want to get access to information that they shouldn't have, whether that's the whereabouts of their ex-partner, for example, or if they want to really do harm to the lawyers because they see it as the lawyer's fault that the judgment or the outcome has come out the way it has. So that means that law firms aren't just needing to worry about cyber criminals who are interested in it for money. They need to be worried about people who are in it because of the very specific matters that they're running. And it does mean that the ways that they can be attacked and the types of people who are focused on attacking them is quite different to a lot of the rest of the community. And that's a heightened risk for lawyers and law firms, unfortunately.
Do you have any examples of the different ways that they could attack different practice areas in law?
Yeah, so one of the really troubling ones for me is around the access to personal information for, say, family law and domestic violence victims. So if you are somebody who's trying to escape domestic violence and your personal details are very much at risk, if your ex-partner finds out where you are, then that can be a personal safety risk for you. Your lawyers will need to know where you are and how to contact you so they can help you with the applications that you're making and the things that you need advice on. Now, what's being used more and more is social engineering. So social engineering often comes in the form of what we call phishing, where you would get an email or a text message that seems legitimate and is encouraging you to click on a link or to reply and give certain information that then can make you subject to a cyber attack, or could in fact give away passwords and details, or in fact money. With the introduction of AI in the last few years, particularly generative AI that can do voices, people can actually do amazing voice creation technology that makes you sound just like the person that you're pretending to be. So imagine this scenario. You've got a family law practice, you've got a wonderful receptionist who's there answering the phones, and we have a distressed client call up and say, I know I've had to change my address a bunch of times because I've been having to move around. Could you please tell me the address that you have on file for me so I can make sure you've got the latest one? It sounds like the person, they've got all the right kinds of details to confirm their identity because they know their own birth date, etc. They've got phone number. And so the receptionist says, yes, of course, the address we have on file is this. But it's not actually the client. It's actually their ex-partner who's using the generative AI voice to now get that piece of information. And they would know sensitive data like date of birth and phone number, etc. They can be very convincing in that social engineering scenario. And so what firms have to be thinking about is, what is, for the different types of clients that they work with, the sensitive data we're talking about. For commercial law firms, it's going to be completely different to the family law scenario I've just been talking about. So you do need to be talking to your teams about what kind of information, if given out over the phone or by email or text message or any other means, could be sensitive for our clients, and how can we verify that the person we are talking to or emailing or texting with is in fact our client, because it's so easy for them to run a scam these days.
How can you verify that?
Yeah, it's really hard to think about this, but it's actually about going back to manual methods. So, for example, instead of saying, of course, let me give you that information over the phone, you could say, can I call you back on the number we have on file so that I know that it's you? That's one way, so that if it in fact wasn't the phone call coming from your client, that you would ring your clients and they would go, no, that's not me. Another method is to say, well, why don't you tell me the address and I can confirm if that's the one we have in our system. And if it isn't, you can give me the new address and I can update the system, right? So that if you're not giving out information, you are simply taking in information, because that way you're not responsible for leaking that information, but you can then, by a secondary means, confirm that the change to the information that it was occurring was in fact correct. It's pretty old school to do that.
This it highlights the education piece of all
Yes.
of this and the training that you can do, which I guess you can do regardless of whether you have the internal resources of a ICT team and you're a small firm and might not have that.
You're right. You don't have to have any kind of complex IT support to do this. It's actually very manual methods. And one other one that we can do, and we actually should all do this with our families to help avoid social engineering scams that happen to us all personally, right? Is you can have a safe word. So you can have clients set up a safe word with you, which they can then use to confirm that it's them. And so you would have that safe word recorded somewhere manually on the file that couldn't be hacked. And you can do this with your family, write it on the fridge, or don't keep it digitally, but write it somewhere where everybody knows what the family safe word is. That safe word can then be used to do verification. So you say, absolutely, I'm really happy to give you that information. Can you give me your safe word? And that way, only the person who set up the safe word with you would be able to do that. And again, it's a non-technical method that can be used to help to do that verification, both with clients, but also if you're talking to a family member there's a lot of phishing scenarios where you'll get a text message or a phone call saying, Mum, I've lost my phone, I need money to do X, Y, Z, or I'm in a dangerous situation, I need you to pay money to help me out of it. And instead of worrying that your child might genuinely need your help, or your parent who's thinking that you can say, I'm absolutely here for you, I just need the safe word. And so it's something that can be used very quickly and easily to help do verification and avoid being scammed, unfortunately, by the cyber criminals.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's such a simple thing that hard to think of. So like when you say it's like a light bulb moment, it's, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But without it, you'd, like at the start when I first asked, you just have no idea about how you could possibly confirm that this person isn't who they say they are.
That's right. And the thing with the AI is it's just going to get better, which means it's going to be harder for us to detect when it's not the person's voice. And actually they can do video now too. So we can take little snippets of video like our conversation today, and they can create video that looks just like us with our voices, and it can interact. So we need to be ready to deal with impersonation of people, not just via voice and via email, but also by video, and to have these security by design embedded practices that aren't technical. They're just a don't trust but verify principle. Trust the person you're talking to, but verify they are who they say they are, whether that's coming in via video, via voice, or via email and text.
And do you think by being able to have the video, I know that like some AML software, you like roll your face around and scan it. Does that kind of mean that isn't as safe as you think it is if your face can be mimicked from all the video material out there?
That's right, it can be. So they are actually having to come up with new ways of securing and identifying you with software and other technology, because it used to be that your thumbprint was very secure. Now your face and biometrics can be very secure, but all of that is being overtaken by the evolving technology. It's also happening with passwords. So we have certain password standards at the moment where you use passwords are still safe and uncrackable as long as they are more than 12 characters and contain a mixture of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. You're pretty safe. And as long as you're only using your password once for each account, you don't reuse your passwords everywhere. But when quantum encryption hits the market, which it is, available in some spaces already, and it will become widely available, it can crack those passwords straight away. So the industry is working on what to do about this, and they're working on new ways of doing that password verification and protecting our systems. But it's just another example about how technology is evolving so quickly that it's undermining our traditional ways of doing security. So we're going to have to become, as a community, much more aware and also much quicker to adapt to the new measures of security and stop reusing all our passwords across lots of different accounts, and to be suspicious, trusting, but verifying who we're talking to and what details we're giving out.
Yeah, and I guess just thinking about your passwords more generally, that you might have this one password for, say, Google, but Google is connected and logs you into all of your other platforms. And sometimes
Yeah.
it might be your base password for Google. So you really got to think about it, which probably most people don't do.
And if you use your Google password anywhere else and it's compromised, you then are exposed. So by having complex passwords, using a different complex password for each account, and using a password manager to help you remember them, because nobody can remember the thousands of complex passwords we have to use every day. That's how you can stay safe. And a great example was there was a breach of Ticketek recently, and also Ticketmaster. So most Australians would have interacted with one of those ticket providers at some point to buy tickets to our favourite shows. And Ticketek or Ticketmaster will hold our credit card information and have also our phone numbers, date of birth, addresses, and other sensitive information. If you've reused those passwords anywhere else, then you need to now go change all of those passwords as well, because your passwords were impacted there. However, in my case, luckily I am pretty good at just using a password once. So I went, oh, they've had a breach. I log on, change my password, and I'm safe again. So it's a relatively small fix when there is a breach of a big company like that, rather than realizing that actually I could be exposed across hundreds of different accounts where I've reused that password. So it can feel like a daunting task to start to change those passwords. Password managers help you to do it. They help to create the passwords for you, and then they remember them. So you just have to set aside a few minutes a day to go and change the ones you commonly use. And then the next time you log into somewhere, you always think, I have to change my password. If it's not one that's already in my password manager, I'll go in and I'll change it and create a new one. And then gradually you're getting safer and safer every day that you do that.
And what's to say that the password manager itself won't get hacked?
I held off for a long time from using it. So password managers do occasionally get hacked. It was one of the big providers, LastPass, got hacked a couple of years ago, and that's actually who I use. But they are engineered to be very secure. And so whilst it got hacked, my password stayed safe because of the way that they engineered their security. They have one job, which is to be super secure and to have layer upon layer of security. So those layers of security are much greater than most organizations have for their day-to-day interactions. So it is a risk, but actually most of the password managers don't keep your master password. So even if they are hacked, your password vault is still safe because you are the only one who has that password. There is a risk that if you forget your master password, then your passwords are gone. But then there's a process of resetting all your passwords again, etc. So there is a risk of that happening, but it's much greater risk that your passwords are going to be hacked from some of the other sites, and that because you've reused passwords or they're easy to guess or easy to crack, that you're exposed. And the thing that tipped me over from being I'm not sure about this, to yes, I'm very much believe in passwords, is that the security guys and girls I work with recommend it and they use it themselves. And I thought, okay, if the technical security folks use these, that's good enough for me. They wouldn't be using them if they didn't think that they were secure and the absolute best methodology for protecting themselves.
And so we've highlighted the importance of cybersecurity, that we've delved into it. What are some of the biggest consequences that really highlight why law firms need to be onto cybersecurity today?
So I think we can think about the consequences in two main buckets. One are the consequences for the firm, and the other are the consequences for their clients. So the consequences for the firm is, to start with, that as lawyers, we trade on trust. We are trusted advisors, or we hope to be, for our clients. And our clients trust us with their most sensitive information, whether that's personal information about their family law dispute, whether it's their life savings to buy a house, whether that's the information about the dispute that they're having, or whether it's the project that they want to launch into with their business, which could potentially change the future for their business and all of their shareholders and other engaged stakeholders. So regardless of the type of law you're in, we are the holders of hugely sensitive information. So the consequences for a firm who has a cyber breach is that trust evaporates immediately, because no longer is your firm the vault for that sensitive information. That sensitive information is splashed all over the dark web if you're lucky, if not completely gone. So the consequences for a law firm can be that it ceases to be able to operate because their clients lose all trust and they won't come back to you for future help and business. And there's no real coming back from that. Trust and reputation takes years and years to grow. And unfortunately, with a cyber breach, it's just gone in seconds. So the consequences following on from the breach, not only for loss of trust and potentially loss of business for the entire firm, is that there can be consequences for you from a fines, regulatory, and also lawsuit, following on lawsuit action. So there are fines if you don't report the breaches appropriately to the different regulators, and that can include, depending on how you're constituted as a law firm and where you're based, the law societies, ASIC, and the OAIC. And potentially also in future, there will be legislation that requires reporting for ransom payments and ransom requests, and that was likely to be coming out at the end of this year. And so any organisation that is requested to pay a ransom or pays a ransom has to report that. So there's regulatory obligations to report, which if you don't meet can involve fines. Then there's investigations. So the OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, will potentially do an investigation into the breach that you report to see whether or not you had met your obligations under the Australian privacy principles, particularly Principle 11, about whether you had taken the reasonable steps to protect that personal information that you held in your firm. And if they find that you didn't take those reasonable steps, then there are consequences for that. And they can be enforceable undertakings. They can also be actions in the federal court to have a penalty fine against you. So there's that side of it. And they're not the only regulator who can take action. ASIC can as well, against directors of a company if a law firm is structured as a company. And potentially under the new regulation, there'll be consequences there. And then the third consequence group is the lawsuits that will follow. So if you cause, because of your lack of pre-planning and lack of protection of the information on your systems from a cyber attack, you cause that information to be released, and that causes major deals to go under, it causes major leaks of intellectual property that was sensitive, that has real consequences. And It can also include, say, somebody's life savings or the deposit for their house, or in fact, the wholesale proceeds for their house. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars goes to the threat actor and not to the right person. You can be sued for that. And hopefully your insurance will cover some of that, but not always. So the lawsuits that can follow will become increasingly common for consequences of a breach. And that will then further financially impact, but also reputationally impact on them.
When in this piece does telling your clients come into it?
That is a really hard thing to balance. I tell you what you don't want, and that's for your clients to find out from the newspaper. So you have an obligation under the Privacy Act to tell your clients where their personal information is impacted, and also not just your clients, but anyone whose personal information that is impacted, and that includes your employees. If you're a listed company, you have an obligation to tell the market, but there's no hard and fast rule about exactly when you must tell your customers if it's not a personal information impact and it's not a market listing impact. But the rule of thumb is you want to be in control of that message. So don't let it get out to the media and have the media tell your clients that you have had a breach, because that will really cement the loss of trust. Organizations that handle a breach well, with good, active, proactive communication, clear communication with the clients about what's happening as far as they know and actions they can take to protect themselves, and ongoing updates, they are the ones that recover best from a cyber attack. So you should tell your clients as soon as you can, but you may not want to tell them a huge amount of information until you know it, because investigation of a cyber incident can take days, weeks, and sometimes months, depending on the complexity. But you should immediately tell them when you suspect that something has happened, what you're doing to look into it, what they should be doing to protect themselves, i.e. changing passwords, backing up information, being aware of flow-on requests for information or data, and to ensure that they can protect themselves whilst you are looking into that. But don't leave it so late that the media gets wind of it and tells your clients for you.
Yeah. And now switching to the preventing piece of all of this, because obviously that's the best possible outcome. Starting at maybe an individual level or a small firm level without extensive ICT resources, what can they put in place to defend themselves and prevent these attacks as best as they can?
So the first thing is good password practices. Okay, we've talked a lot about passwords already, but it really is the number one thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do is make sure that you've got multi-factor authentication. So that's where you have an app on your phone that sends you a code that you have to enter in on your computer or on your phone to confirm that it's really you. Because that means if somebody does crack your password, or there is a password that they've found and they're trying to reuse and to hack into your systems, that they can't, because they don't have what is actually the second password, the second line of defense for getting in. So many of the major breaches we read about in the newspapers are from having a lack of what we call multi-factor authentication. Or most platforms that you interact with on a daily basis, be it your bank, if you use Zero, if you use Microsoft tools, they all have MFA as an option. You just need to make sure that you've clicked it on and that you're then using your authenticator to provide that second layer of protection. So those are two really simple, very low tech things that you can do. Then it's really important to make sure that when you are using new programs in your firm, software programs, that you are checking their security. You are only using them where they have MFA, because that's the second layer of defense, and that you're ensuring that your material is backed up, because your backup is your best defense and best recovery mechanism if you do get ransomed and your data is stolen or compromised. But there are more and more people in the market who are helping small firms for actually a very reasonable price, like $100, $130 a month, to provide 24/7 monitoring and security for your firm. So it's like any other kind of IT support. It is an essential part of making sure your firm can operate. And it is available now from providers who can look after very small businesses, which actually wasn't the case a few years ago. Small practitioners, micro firms were on their own. That thankfully has changed, and there are plenty of providers out there who can support you for quite reasonable fees. But it's a high recommendation to make sure you've got somebody monitoring your systems for suspicious activity, and notifying you if there's anything that looks a bit strange, because it could be somebody trying to steal data, and then you can jump on it and often shut it down before they actually get access to that data.
Yeah, it's a really practical tip. And for the larger firms, are there any kind of misconceptions that they might have about their readiness? So they might have the internal resources, but is there a misconception there about how ready they actually are to defend against these attacks?
I think for the big firms, there has to be the culture of cybersecurity. So they might have excellent IT systems and IT teams. They do need to be asking the question of those IT teams about what security comes with those services now, if they're in-house or if they're externally provided, because your basic IT support is not actually security support. It's quite a different set of skills. It's quite a different set of tools and techniques that are used to provide security. So all firms should ask their IT provider, if they have one, what kind of security support they have, whether that's managed detection and response, and how that's being monitored. Is it 24/7? And if something suspicious is happening, how will they be alerted and what kind of action will be taken? Because a lot of firms who think they have great support actually discover that no, they just have basic IT and not security support. So it's really important to ask those questions. But the other thing that the big firms need to do is they need to make sure that everybody is trained, not just the IT team, but everybody is trained in phishing awareness, in social engineering awareness, and in the manual processes we were talking about for protecting against accidental data release and being socially engineered into providing system access or information access. Because I think in the bigger the organization, the more people are sheltered from the day-to-day IT frontage and understanding about the vulnerabilities. And also, you can get very tied up in the specific legal work that you're an expert in and not think about how that has a broader impact for security. I always tell people that security is everybody's job. And if you're not sure how cybersecurity is your job, then you need to pause, maybe talk to somebody who's an expert and say, how does cybersecurity fit into my job? And how can I be more secure in the way that I'm working and the way that I'm advising my clients and the things I'm taking into consideration? Because it really is everybody's job. And the culture of a business about security will be its best defense. If everybody is aware, they're trained, and if they see something suspicious or they think that email or that text message doesn't sound quite right, and they know that they can put up their hand and say, hey, this is a bit strange, and that somebody will pay attention, that's the best defense for the firm.
Yeah, it's that old saying, you don't want to be the weakest link. And you just know that if you were the weakest link, you would lose so much sleep over it. It would be disastrous for your well-being and your career and
Yeah,
everything. So like the simple little steps are very much worth it, even if they don't seem like it at the time.
exactly. And it's about the personal hygiene that each of us can take care of, and then the flow and impact of us having poor personal cybersecurity hygiene and the impact on the business. So some of the biggest breaches we've read about in the last few years were due to poor personal cybersecurity hygiene by an individual employee that was unfortunately exploited and led to access to the whole business and millions of records and people's lives being impacted as a result. So it really all does start at home and start with the individual.
Mm. And we spoke about how cybersecurity has changed so much. So it used to be that you could put your voice into your mobile banking app and that would confirm your identity. But now people can replicate our voices. And so with cybersecurity and attacks and threats changing so quickly, how can lawyers, or anybody for that case, stay up to date with the new threats and the new things that might be happening around them?
So there's a couple of things that I do to keep across this. Mind you, this is my job, but there are daily newsletters. There's a great Australian newspaper called Cyber Daily that I subscribe to that tells me about all the latest hacks that are happening and the latest types of threats. There's also just paying attention to the news and thinking, oh, there's that kind of breach that's happened. I must remember to go and change my password for that. So anytime you hear about a breach, I'm thinking, okay, do I interact with that company or that software? I better go and change my passwords and make sure that I'm secure again as a result. So keeping your ear out and paying attention to the cybersecurity news that does hit the mainstream media. Then there's actually, if you're really serious about it, and firms can think about doing this at the firm level, there's what we call cyber threat intelligence. Now, cyber threat intelligence is like a newsletter or a newspaper about cyber threats. And it's shared amongst the people who subscribe to that newsletter about what is the threat, how is it being used, what are the hallmarks for it, and what you can do to defend against it. And there are some amazing cyber threat intelligence providers, and there's a new one in Australia that I'm actually working with called CI-ISAC Australia. So it's CI-ISAC. CI-ISAC is a community not-for-profit threat intelligence sharing, and they have a focus on the legal industry as well. And what they're doing is they're bringing in all of the threat information from around the world and across Australia, and they're putting it together in a really digestible newsletter. And I'm saying newsletter, that's actually not the technical term for it, but think about it as a newsletter that comes into your inbox and says, watch out, there's this type of threat targeting this type of business, or this type of software program, or this type of industry. These are the things that you should look out for, and these are the things you can do to protect yourself. So I highly recommend that firms sign up for that newsletter, because it's Australian specific. It's gathering information from the community, and it provides you and also your IT teams with the actionable things you can do to defend against each one of those threats. There are lots of other cyber threat intelligence newsletters you can subscribe to. Some of them are quite expensive. It's one of the reasons why I do recommend the community not-for-profit based ones like the CI-ISAC one, because the money that you pay to be a member to get that newsletter goes back into that community and helping Australians to defend against cyber attacks.
And when we're thinking about the future of cybersecurity, noting that it's probably going to evolve very quickly and more, how do you think AI is going to impact the ability of hackers or attackers to attack law firms? And how do you think it will also help lawyers defend against these attacks?
Okay, so cyber attackers are already using AI to perpetrate attacks. They're using what we call bots, which are artificial intelligence, to take passwords and usernames that have been stolen in other attacks and to spray them across the internet and just see what it unlocks. And actually, there was a story a few months ago, just before the Taylor Swift concert tour came through, where people's passwords that had been stolen in other attacks were being used in what we call credential stuffing, which is essentially just firing millions of combinations of stolen passwords at a website and seeing what works. And so people who had reused their password somewhere else, the threat actors were able to get into their Ticketek accounts and, there were Taylor Swift tickets there, and they sold them. What could have been worth quite a bit. And more devastatingly, the Taylor Swifties didn't get to go to the concert, right? That was the real damage. So we know that they are using AI to their advantage already. The good news is, though, that AI can be used to help the good guys in defending, because AI can be trained in what are the threat techniques that are being used, what are the signatures, we call them indicators of compromise, that are being used by the threat actors, and the AI that's being used by the good guys can be trained to detect those and to stop that activity, to shut systems down and to take away privileges and other things that stop threat actors from taking action inside IT systems. So our security teams are already using AI, and they will be able to do that in a more sophisticated way as the AI develops. What it does mean, though, is that things are going to move fast. Because AI really accelerates the speed of everything that it can help with. It can turn one person into a million, because they can run so many bots doing activities for them. You don't need human time to do things anymore. That we're going to just have to get used to change happening really fast. So that means we're going to have to be quick about our password changes. We're going to have to be good about our personal cybersecurity hygiene, and we're going to have to keep up. And it's going to be running a marathon, not a sprint, because this isn't something that's going to end. We are going to have to just make this part of our daily lives, because things aren't just going to be secure when we wake up tomorrow. Unfortunately, in cyber, and because of technology like AI, actually we go to bed and we wake up and the world is less secure than it was yesterday in most cases. So every individual has a role to play to upskill themselves. We don't expect the government or the police to be responsible for locking our own house, right? Or locking our own car. We know that's our own security responsibility, and we don't blame other people for us failing to do those things. We do want to make sure that the police are taking action against having criminals who are roaming the streets looking to break into our house. But if we leave everything wide open, it's to be expected that maybe somebody will take advantage of that. Cybersecurity is the same. We do want organizations to be secure. We want law firms to be protecting themselves and their clients' data. But we also have to take responsibility for ourselves because the government can't protect us completely. They're taking as much action as they can, but there is a huge level of personal responsibility. But every individual business has a level of responsibility for themselves as well. And you cannot afford to just sit back and hope that someone else is going to take care of it. It really sits with you.
For sure. So much valuable content that you've shared today. And to wrap up the episode, I have 3 quick-fire questions for you. Starting off, if you weren't a lawyer working in cybersecurity or another area of law, what would be your dream job?
I think my dream job would be running a sewing cafe where I can have people drop in and learn how to sew or knit or do other textile-based craft, and I can teach them and work on my own projects and really just create a community hub for textiles and craft. That's my passion.
I love that answer. It's such a good idea. Why does that not already exist?
There was one in Canberra for a little while. COVID killed it, sadly. So maybe it's my retirement dream.
Next up, what's one thing about cybersecurity that people don't understand that you wish they understood?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that it's not an IT technical problem. It's a people problem. And so don't feel paralyzed that you don't have IT skills and therefore you can't do anything to protect yourself. Actually, there's heaps we can do as people, and even with people with very basic technology skills. If you can use a phone, you can secure yourself to a very high level. So don't feel paralyzed.
And lastly, what is the top thing a lawyer can do now to not be the weakest link in their firm?
Go change all your passwords and put MFA on. There's 2 things, but
Nice.
that is the one thing that everybody can go away today. They don't need their firm or the businesses that they work for or anyone else to do anything for them in that space. They can take that action today, and that will make them so much more secure tomorrow.
I love it. Thank you so much, Annie. I've loved our conversation, and this is going to be a very valuable resource for all the lawyers out there and people that aren't lawyers as well. If people would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I also have accounts on Instagram and Facebook, both for myself and business, so please reach out there. But you can also find us through our website, which is cybergc.au.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophie. It's been a really fun conversation.